my name is Dan Hennen. Today is December 19th, 2018, and I'll be doing an episode on the Crowley case updates. Tonight's episode is called Facts and Speculation, Facts versus Speculation. And the reason I'm doing this episode tonight is we're getting a lot of new members to the page, a lot of new members on the group, and a lot of people following this case. And I mean a lot. There's been a whole influx of new people, and what I find is a lot of the various questions and comments, and some of the messages that I get directly, and some of the posts on other Facebook pages and on YouTube is asking some questions that we now have answers to. So since the 4 years now that this has been going on, we've got lab results, we've got FOIA requests, we've got police reports, we've got BCA information, we've got new people coming forward with shedding lights on things, we've got new records, and we've got new information. And with that comes a lot of theories, speculation, facts, and I think it's hard for the new members. This is an overwhelming case. There's no other easier way to put it. There's a lot of tentacles of things going on in a case like this, and it's very, it's a lot to deal with. So don't take it personally if you're new to the page, new to the site, and new to this investigation. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, you will be, and so that's nothing on you. This is a case, and hopefully this episode tonight will bring forth what is facts versus what is speculation, because with a case like this, we need to separate the two and start focusing on what the actual facts are of the case. Tonight's broadcast will be done in 3 parts. Part 1, the deal. Part 2, the crime scene. Part 3, banking irregularities. Part 1, the deal. We'll start with this, and I'll preface each statement here with, is it a fact or speculation? Fact. Let's start the first one. David did have a deal. David had a deal. That's a fact. Back in July, he had signed on with this deal for a movie, a feature film movie, web series, whatever it was ultimately going to be. He had a deal, and so that is a fact. That is not speculation. The narrative given by many members of the Gray State team was that there was no deal, there was never a deal, there was no Hollywood deal, there was no movie deal, there was whatever you call it. The narrative given by these individuals is that there was no deal and there never was a deal. And so the fact is, let's just start off right off the bat that there was a deal. Also, fact, the deal was tabled until both Mitch Heil and Danny August Mason signed over their rights. The information was sent out, I think, with an August 1st cutoff date to transfer their rights, to relinquish their rights in the project. And so this was August 1st of 2014. He had the deal basically done in June, solidified at the end of July. Recent paperwork has shown that. And then he sent out the information with these two. The two individuals that I'm talking about had partial business dealings with David and had some overlapping business connections. And so in order to move forward, David wanted to cut the ties from a legal standpoint with both of these individuals so he could move forward with this project. And so until he had the signatures from the legal release from both of these individuals signing away their rights to the project, he couldn't go forward. So David wasn't working on the film, the project, and it was, I would call it, the fact of the matter is that the project was tabled. Now we do also know that the MEG team, the Michael Entertainment Group, or the two Mikes, along with David Crowley, along with David's attorney Adam Gislason, all 3 of these groups and partnerships were moving forward with this project. And so never was it canceled or what have you. It was moving. They were moving forward in the terms of doing it. Next fact: Ranny's birthday. Ranny's birthday was in August of that year, around the same time, and it was awkward. The party was awkward, and that's a fact. We've got that from the documentary, from the people that were there, the commentary that David and Comel were quiet, they weren't talking. We have to remember that Danny August Mason was at that party. He had recently received this legal paperwork to distance himself from the project. So obviously he didn't bring it up. David Crowley didn't bring it up. And yes, it would have been quite awkward at a party at the setting for a little girl's 5-year-old birthday party. And so he had already, we know what the timeline shows that Danny August Mason had received that letter. And I think that's why it was awkward. Comel knew that Danny would be there. She didn't say much. David was aware that they didn't want to really actually bring it up at the party, but it is what it is. And so he was invited and he came. I also would tend to agree that it would have been a very awkward situation. Now, the other Gray State Project members more than likely weren't aware of anything going on behind the scenes, as David kept that quiet also. And so they weren't probably aware of the deal or the legal request and all this stuff going back and forth. Now, the narrative that was pushed, this is important when you watch the documentary or read things out there as far as speculation, that the narrative pushed was that David and Comel were going through some troubling times, and both were quiet that day. And so that information is speculation. That's a narrative that's being pushed. It was an awkward setting, and they were quiet. It had nothing to do with going through problems. Fact, David and Comel were considering buying a home in Burbank, California. This was per an email that was released recently. So after he had the deal, and the deal was moving forward, and after these two individuals would have relinquished their rights, who knows where they would have been? Would they have been living in Minnesota? Would they have 2 homes? Would they have moved to California? But this is also, once again, it's a fact, and that shows, and there's proof that it shows that they were looking forward and excited for the future. Fact, Mitch Heil signed off quickly on his piece of the legal paperwork. And so Mitch received his, signed off, moved forward. Fact, Mason never signed off on his. Now, evidence shows with the email string that was going back and forth that there was a back and forth email string between Danny August Mason, who was a co-creator and lead actor in the trailer and in the movie, and David Crowley. They were going back and forth from the months of September, October, November, and December. And so when the bodies were found, Danny August Mason still had never signed off. So we know that to be true as a fact, that the paperwork was never signed off. Fact, David Crowley was working on The Rise in the meantime. The Rise is the documentary portion, side project of the Gray State feature film movie. And so because he couldn't move forward because the project was tabled, because he couldn't do anything on that signed contract deal with Hollywood until Danny August Mason relinquished his rights. Mason ignored that and tabled it and pushed it and pushed it and pushed it and didn't want to face the facts. David couldn't do anything. He was stuck. He decided to put all his time into The Rise, the documentary The Rise, which had nothing to do with the Hollywood film, and he wanted to get that done and get that out. And in fact had a self-imposed deadline, I think, in the middle of December, to say I wanted to get it done in 2 weeks was one of his posts. He was working on that and wanted to get that out. So we know that he was actively working on The Rise. Fact, the movie was to be worked on as a web series. And so at first he wanted a feature film, and then the documentation that shows with emails going back and forth now with the group in Hollywood is that they were going to turn it into a web series. Fact, David Crowley gave Danny Mason a deadline of 12/16/14. So one of the emails it did say, I've been waiting around for your answer. Yes or no, are you going to sign off or are you not? Nothing, nothing, nothing. And it was the 9th of December when an email said to forwarded to Danny August Mason that says the deadline's the 16th. He gave me essentially a week. We know that to be fact. No speculation there. It's in writing. He said the 16th is the cutoff. So he gave him a week to decide. Fact. David was taunting Danny August Mason with an online post that same day, December 9th, that said he would consider giving away the documentary for free. This is the documentary called The Rise. He wanted to give it away for free. Now, the email exchange also shows, previous to this, that Danny August Mason countered the offer with saying, if I'm going to release my rights, I'm going to get something in return. How about you give me the rights to The Rise, the documentary The Rise, in exchange, and I'll consider relinquishing my rights. And so David Crowley now knew that Danny August Mason had an interest in The Rise, and then he used that now as a bargaining chip. And I would consider that taunting on that Facebook post. He didn't get a reply for all these months. He gave him a 1-week deadline, and then he goes online to post, I'm going to consider giving away this documentary for free. And then Danny August Mason also said, I put in a lot of time and hours and work on this documentary. I want something in return. And so that was, agree with it or not, I believe David was playing some chess moves there to elicit or to force the hand. Fact. Sean Wright wanted to get the documentary The Rise available for the public to purchase or to buy. He was tight on funds and had an upcoming trial for his felony tax charges pending. And so that's a fact. He was charged and he pled guilty in March of 2015 with that. He put a lot of time into this as well. He was heavily vested in the documentary The Rise. Their plan was to get it out there, get it up for sale, and make some money on this documentary. Speculation. David may have been taunting Sean Wright in that very same Facebook post when he mentions, I want to possibly give it away for free. And so there's nothing to support that. I think that's speculation right there, because he was trying to poke and prod both of these guys. At this time, he had already known that his inner circle was infiltrated and he was among the rats, and he was trying to get rid of them. And so he was poking and prodding, I think, looking for answers and looking for a response. Sean Wright had put a lot of time into this documentary, and by putting it out there for free, he wasn't going to make anything himself. And so I think he was looking for, trying to elicit a response from both these individuals. Fact. Sean Wright asks David on social media to be sure that he removes his tax stuff if he does plan on pushing it out there for free. Now that's a fact. We've got documentation that shows that you better remove my tax stuff first, if indeed you want to give it away for free. Now, note the sound and the language of that message. Sean Wright, at this point, it doesn't even care if it's going to be given out there for free. Remember, that was supposed to be part of the package to be sold and make some money off this documentary. It's so important for him not to have the tax stuff out there that he goes out of the way to say, even if you give it out for free, I don't even care. But you dang well better remove that tax information from the version you're currently working on. So we can see here the give and the take, the chess moves that were being done in this operation of these people that knew that they were not getting along and things were coming to a head. Fact. Sean Wright spent several years and many hours working on the documentary The Rise and was very proud of it. We know that to be a fact. Fact. Sean Wright personally followed the various rogue uploads of The Rise on YouTube once folks started putting it out there for free on YouTube. Now remember, after the bodies were found, a couple days version of The Rise, not the final version, they called it the rough cut, and it had the tax information in that version. Mike Pachesny threw it out there. Once that got out there, fans of Gray State thought that was the original, the final version, and started copying it, dumping it onto mirror websites, and posting it themselves. So guess who personally made sure that that didn't go on? It was Sean Wright. Sean Wright said on a Facebook post that it was him himself going out there and removing it. So he was working with YouTube to pull this version down off of the internet under the guise of copyright infringement. And so, and remember, this was the initial version of the Rise. People can get the Rise version out there right now. That's cleaned up, edited. It's a little shorter, and it's out there, and it's available, and it is for free. It doesn't have the tax stuff removed. It does have the tax stuff removed, but this original one did not at the time. And Sean Wright was out there working with YouTube to get those videos pulled down. That really, and I think that really yanked his chain, the fact that Pachesny put it out there. Speculation. Now this is speculation. Sean Wright may have wanted to salvage anything he could from the documentary The Rise, as that would have been a big chunk of income for him, as he had no regular job at the time. And so that's speculation. That he was, I think, banking on that to come true, and also the fact that he was waiting on these. He had some back taxes that he owed with the state of Minnesota, part of his felony lawsuit. And so I think he was hoping that would make some money and then be able to repay some of that back. That's, once again, that's speculation on my part. Speculation. It has been almost proven that Sean Wright was/is a federal informant of some sort. He has a criminal past and began working with the We Are Change movement in roughly 2009. In 2009, when that movement became infiltrated. He moved to Minnesota and didn't seem to hold down any regular job, but always carried cash, and may have been assigned to infiltrate the Gray State project from within, and then report back to his handler on what David Crowley's been up to. That's speculation. And even if that were true, I don't know if there would even be ever a way to prove it to be true, even if it was true. So when he came in at some odd times, he came into David Crowley's life on some coincidental dates and times and came to Minnesota. And so if that was the case, he very easily could have been some sort of informant. Wright has violent tendencies. Speculation. Sean Wright had a motive to kill Crowley, as he had a vested interest in the project and could have used the additional cash. By having a handler at the federal level, he may have even counted on escaping any charges if he did get caught. He may have even considered himself protected in a sense. That's speculation. Fact. Sean Wright had a Twitter account. Fact. Sean Wright wasn't active on Twitter. Wright posted an image of a Christmas tree on Christmas Eve, 2014. Fact. The neighbor across the street from the Crowleys, named Brett Millay, said he saw a figure in the window at the Crowley home on Christmas Eve. That's a fact. Now, the speculation is, here's speculation, was that at the Crowley home David Crowley, or was it not David Crowley? All we know is that Brett Millay saw a figure. Speculation. If he were to be questioned about his whereabouts on Christmas Eve. That's speculation. This has come up many times as far as why would he post that photo on that particular night. Fact. Sean Wright made numerous threats to members of the Justice for Crowley group once they started of inquiry around the strange circumstances around the case. Speculation. Sean Wright felt safe in making these threats. Why? His threats were on voice recordings, audio, social media, Facebook Messenger programs. He communicated as if he knew there would be no blowback for him. Why? If he had a federal handler, maybe it made him feel more confident. That's speculation. But he certainly was nervous about going to jail or prison about the tax information, but yet making threats and acting in a violent behavior to myself and several others, he didn't seem to have issues with that. And those are all criminal in nature as well. But he didn't care, unless he didn't realize those were wrong. Fact. Sean Wright demanded administrative access to the Facebook page Justice for David Crowley and Gray State. Fact. Sections of threads and comments were deleted from that page after Sean Wright was granted administrative access to that page. Speculation. Sean Wright personally deleted the data. Not sure if there's a way to prove that, but that's what the speculation is. Fact. Sean Wright demanded admin access to the Facebook group Justice for David Crowley and Family. Fact. Sean Wright was denied that access. Fact. Sean Wright became angry, violent, and made threats to myself, the admin of the page, when he was denied. And that speculation. Sean Wright needed to control the narrative of the case and thus took charge in removing discussions that didn't fit and could have potentially landed him in prison. Part 2. The crime scene. Fact. Medium velocity blood spatter was found at the scene. Medium is something resulting from a handheld weapon or an instrument. Fact. High velocity blood spatter was not found at the scene. High velocity comes from a weapon, gun. Shotgun, rifle, pistol, handgun. High velocity. That's a very important point to make, as the Apple Valley Police Department ruled all 3 were killed due to gunshots. And you can obviously see the blood on the floor. And so the point to make is this. The blood on the floor is resulting from medium velocity blood spatter, not high. And so now we got a problem. Speculation. The individuals that were shot somewhere else and dumped on the site at the Crowley home, or a drop cloth or tarp or something was used at the scene to collect the blood after the beatings or shootings or whatever took place there. So that's speculation. It's something, they either weren't killed there, or if they were killed there, something was laid down to collect the blood and the high velocity blood spatter. Fact. Comel Crowley was shot 3 times. Speculation. Comel Crowley was shot 2 times. Now that's speculation. The autopsy report officially says that she was shot 2 times because there was 2 bullet holes in her, through her skull, that they noticed 2 exit holes. The fact of the matter is there were 3 bullet fragments found in the living room floor that had Comel Crowley's DNA on them. and that is her blood, tissue, and flesh on those fragments. That means they traveled through Comel Crowley's flesh 3 bullets. And now her skull was missing, and 2 of her hands were missing. So the entrance or exit holes from that 3rd bullet could have been in either of the hands or another part of the skull that wasn't found on the scene. But the fact of the matter is, 3 bullet fragments, that's used bullets, had her blood on it. And not blood that was just, dripped on and happened to fall on those bullet fragments, but the bullet fragments themselves had flesh cutting through flesh and DNA of her on that. It means they went through her body, her skin, her flesh. Fact, Rannie Crowley was shot 1 time. Fact, no bullets recovered at the scene had David's blood on them. None. Now, people may like that comment or not like that comment or take offense to it, but the fact of the matter is 0 bullet fragments in that house recovered to date by the police had any of David's blood on them at all. Speculation. David's bullet fragment has either not yet been found or it was removed from the scene. That's the only 2 options. It wasn't found in the house. The one found in the attic didn't go through his head. In fact, that one didn't have blood on it at all. So we got a problem there. Fact, David Crowley's fingerprints were not found on the gun. That's interesting for more than one reason. Number one, you can't put the gun in his hand to do the shooting of anybody that day. And the fact that he owned the gun, that was his gun. There should be David Crowley fingerprints all over that gun. So, was it wiped down? That is speculation. Not a single fingerprint of David Crowley was on that weapon. Fact, the bullet fragment found in the attic never went through any human flesh. Remember, no blood on it through anybody. So whoever fired that shot into the ceiling we can speculate all we want as far as how that got there. But for police to attribute that bullet fragment as to being the bullet that killed David Crowley is ridiculous. Fact, the bullet fragment found in the attic went through the living room ceiling without impacting anything on the way. Now that's a fact. It didn't hit anything. It wasn't ricocheted, didn't go through anybody's body, any flesh, didn't hit anything else. It went directly to the ceiling. So why was a shot fired into the ceiling? Speculation. The bullet fragment found in the speculation. Now the police are using this theory again, that David Crowley did all this. And once again, it's a theory. Greg Fernandez Jr. is very good at pointing out the fact that we're looking for evidence and we're looking for facts. Apple Valley investigators say that David Crowley killed himself and killed his wife and killed his daughter. And the bullet that killed him is in the attic, and the gun. Theories. The Apple Valley Police detectives, like this comment or not, is providing us with theories. And I think they're incorrect, but they're nothing other than theories. Fact. The bullet fragment found in the attic had David's DNA on it. It's different than blood, different than flesh. His DNA was on that bullet fragment. They call it's from a touch DNA, or when he first purchased the ammunition. The gun was his, he purchased it, and DNA would be all over all of those things. They were his. Fact, Ranny's arm, her right arm, was missing. Fact, Ranny had a fractured rib under her armpit near her right arm. The fact. Speculation. Randy's right arm was pulled off by a human and a rib being fractured in the process by a person's foot being used as leverage. That's speculation. There's nothing to prove that fact at all. It'll never be proven. But the speculation under her armpit like that, and her arm missing, more than likely pulled off by somebody, a human. Removed Ranny's right arm. That's speculation. That's not a fact. That's not even possible. The dog Paleo ate Ranny's right arm. Once again, speculation. That's not fact. That's a theory. Speculation. Ranny's right arm was taken by the killer or killers as a trophy. Was it? That's conjecture. We don't know. It was missing. It was gone. The dog didn't eat it. Where is her arm? Fact. Comel's skull had 2 bullet holes in it. Fact. 3 bullet fragments found on the scene had Comel's blood on it. Scene. Speculation. The dog Paleo ate both of Comel's hands. Can't be proven. It's not a fact. It may have happened, but as of now, it's not a fact. It's only a fact. David's right hand was missing from the scene. Speculation. The dog Paleo ate David's right hand. Fact. David's left hand of the back of his head in the remaining portion of his skull. So that's an exit wound coming from the front, exiting out somewhere near the back. That's a fact. Speculation is that David shot himself in the forehead. Suicide in the forehead. David shot himself in the mouth. Suicide in the mouth. Fair enough. That's speculation. Speculation also. Speculation. David's left hand was tied up, resulting in being in an advanced state of decomposition. Can't prove it. It's speculation. The question is, why was it in an advanced fact? A portion of skull found on the rug belonged to David. We got indicators now from the examiner's report and the BCA and the articulated well with the other pieces of the skull, meaning it fit together, and it fit together into David's skull, meaning that piece of skull by the left hand was his skull. It was David's, and who knows who it was. But recently that came to light that it was in fact fact. That portion of skull had indentations on it, roughly 10 of them. That would not be normal in a normal situation, normal setting. That's a fact. Roughly 10 on that small little articulated skull was indentations. Speculation. David was beaten with a hard-surfaced object. That's speculation. What would cause the indentations? Hard-surfaced object. Speculation. David was beaten while still alive. Speculation. David was beaten after he was killed. Now, we don't know what happened first or what happened last. I doubt someone after they're already killed would have been beaten. We don't know that, so I'm going to call those both things speculation. He was hit with something hard, some hard instrument, some blunt force trauma. And the fact is that he was beaten. Now, did he do it to himself or did someone else do it to him? That's what we need to find out. Fact. Medium velocity blood spatter found at the scene resembles blunt force trauma performed at the scene. Now we'll go back to the blood that's found on the wood floor near the kitchen. There's spray, there's blood spatter. The fact of the matter is, whatever took place to get that blood happened there. That couldn't have been possibly planted. That couldn't have been possibly staged. So, regardless of where the killings took place, the beating resulting in that blood spatter took place in that living room. Fact. Bloody mark on the floor that resembles a footprint was not a human foot. And so a lot of the new members, people coming to the page, remember seeing that footprint and saying, why was David walking around barefoot in all the blood? What, was he nuts? Was he psycho? That was not, the fact of the matter is that's not an impression or an imprint of a human foot at all. Does it look like it? Yes. Did Apple Valley police investigators assume it was a human foot? Yes, they did. That's speculation. Speculation. The bloody footprint found on the floor was made by an adult's hand made to appear as a foot. That's speculation. If you can do this yourself as far as a kindergarten, grade school, elementary school project in a paint class. You can put your hand in a fist, make the toes, make what looks to be a foot. That's speculation. We don't know what it was. It certainly wasn't a foot, but who knows what it was. Odds are that it was made to look that way by using someone's hand. Fact. David's feet were not tested for blood residue. Speculation. It must have been David's footprints because Comel and Ranny had socks on. So this is where we get into the Apple Valley Police investigation, the detectives. There's a blood footprint on the floor. They look at Ranny, who's got socks on. Comel, who has socks on. And say there's David, who does not have socks on. He's barefoot. Therefore, the footmark is his. And so once again, those are all heavy speculation. Those aren't facts at all. If his foot or feet were tested for blood, it could have been in the police report saying we tested it and sure enough, the foot matched. The bloody footprint was his. The police report said the blood on the floor belonged to Comel Crowley, meaning it was just her blood. They didn't say who walked in it. They just assumed it was David Crowley or who made the markings. Speculation. David was trying to shoot the dog but missed. There was 2 bullet fragments found on the property that didn't impact human flesh. One in the floor, on the floor under the rug that ended up found in the basement wall, and one in the attic. Went through the ceiling, found in the attic. Those are the only 2 bullet fragments in the house that were used, that were from a discharged gun that didn't have human flesh on them. So the narrative that was being used was David was shooting at the dog and missing, which accounted for these missed shots. Now the attic bullet isn't reasonable to have gotten there from shooting at a dog. because it's in the ceiling. The floor, I could buy that. That's reasonable. Speculation. The round fired into the floor was a warning shot for the family to know that the killer or killers were serious. We can't prove that. We can't. That's not a fact. We don't have no evidence to support that. Many have brought it up. I have brought it up, but that is speculation. Some kind of warning shot. Speculation. The firing at the dog theory was only inserted into the theory as a way to account for the error made by the killer or the killers. Remember, a suicidal man wouldn't fire a warning shot into the floor. Also, David was a good shot. He wouldn't have missed the dog if he truly was aiming for it. The entire reason that this topic came up is suspect in and of itself. The whole topic of shooting at the dog and missing, I question as to why that's even been inserted into this narrative. We know it's not true. The question then is, why was it brought up? Speculation. The ceiling shot was fired. The speculation is that the ceiling shot was fired on January 19th, 2015, not when the bodies were found, but 2 days later, and it was blamed on investigators missing it on the fact that the killers made a mistake by taking the bullet fragment that killed David Crowley with them as a trophy. This ploy was needed to ensure the number of bullet casings matched the number of bullet fragments recovered at the scene, which wasn't the case on January 17th, 2015. Now, that's speculation. That's a heavy dose of speculation. But when you do the facts and you do the math and you start adding things up, why was that round fired into the ceiling, and why was it fired on the 19th, if indeed it was? Fact. Investigators left the scene on January 17th with 6 bullet casings and only 4 bullet fragments. So that's a fact. And that is, former law enforcement out there, please comment below here. Former detectives out there, please comment below. Is that something that you would normally do, wrapping up an investigation, closing the investigation, and opening it up to the professional cleaners to come in when you don't even have numbers that match, casings versus fragments? 6 versus 4 when they left that day. Speculation. Questions arise as to why the scene would be closed off in a case of this nature when all the bullet fragments haven't been accounted for. Fact. The cleaning company discovered a bullet fragment, the 5th one now, because they found 4. They found a 5th one on January 19th while cleaning as it rolled out from under a rug. And that's a fact. Fact. Members of the Crowley family and members of the Gray State Project were in the home on January 19th, as the evidence supports to show that a neighbor called 911 just prior to 1 p.m. that afternoon for suspicious activity in the home that didn't relate to the cleaners. Now, that's a fact. I don't know what the speculation is around that. That could be huge. It certainly should have been a huge point for investigators to look into this as to why they were in the house. We don't know why. We don't know what was going on. All we know is that the fact of the matter is members of the family and the Gray State Project were in that home. Fact. Investigators found the 6th bullet fragment in the attic on February 18th, 2015, from the ceiling shot. So a month later, in 3 different visits to the home, they account for all 6 of the bullet fragments. That, to me, is very odd. Very strange. Part 3, banking irregularities. Fact. $50,000 was withdrawn in cash at a Wells Fargo branch location in the middle of October by a member of the Crowley family. Fact. Dan Sr. spent the month of October 2014 in Germany for business. Those are his own words, according to police testimony. He was in Germany the entire month. The other interesting thing about that story is that Wells Fargo branch location was in Minnesota. Cash was withdrawn, $50,000 in cash, at a Minnesota branch location, and Dan Sr. was in Germany. Speculation. Someone other than Dan Sr. made the withdrawal of $50,000. Didn't even appear to be his handwriting, possibly Dan Jr.'s handwriting. But the bank account was only in Dan Sr.'s name. This was a payable on death bank account, or a trust account, or a POD account in the father's name. It was a trust, so when the funds would have been payable on death upon the death of Dan Sr., the father of Dan Jr. and David Crowley, when he dies, then the children would have access to this trust fund or trust account. Now we know that Dan Crowley Sr. is alive, so there should be no one having access to that bank account at all. Which to me means any transaction at that bank not performed by Dan Sr. would constitute fraud. Correct? Speculation. Was the $50,000 cash withdrawal used to pay for hitmen to kill David, or even his whole family? The timing makes sense. By October, Danny August Mason knew that David wasn't going to give him any rights to anything, and was cutting him loose, leaving Danny August Mason with nothing. Now, Dan Jr. was already having been in a fight, some kind of family argument in the month of August, and which resulted in those two not talking to one another. This is Dan Jr. and David Crowley. They stopped talking in August after a fight. At this time, and Dan Jr. may have already figured that things were never going to be, the relationship repaired, or things were never going to get better. Remember, it was serious enough that caused David Crowley to cry, per an email that Comel wrote. Whatever they had, whatever happened in August, really hit David Crowley hard. Now, Danny Jr. may have known this, and he may have figured that the relationship was never going to be, it was past repairable. And although Dan Jr. may have liked Comel and liked Ranny, he may have been possibly presented with an option of killing his brother, and he simply agreed. Now that's speculation. That is speculation. A lot of times a case like this, the plan might be part of killing one person, and then multiple people get killed. And now you're really back against the wall, because now you've got to cover up the whole thing because you were involved in only one portion of it. Which I think is fair to say from a speculation standpoint. It seems with the cover-up in this case, something like that probably went down, where multiple people are covering this whole case up for multiple different reasons. Speculation. Here's speculation. Did Dan Jr. remove the $50,000 from that bank account, knowing one day he would have much more than that and would be able to replenish it back into his father's account? Whether his father knew about it or not, or if he got in trouble for taking it out, the plan could have been to put it back in and say problem solved. Or maybe his father wouldn't even notice. We don't know how closely the father monitored that bank account. Speculation. Did Dan Jr. create the GoFundMe campaign for a goal of $6 million, that's $6 million, to raise funds for the medical issues for Comel Crowley's mother, Nyla Alam? Or was it to raise funds under the direction of his father, who found out about the missing $50,000 and wants it back? So the speculation is, did he create the fund to raise money for insurance medical issues for the mother with cancer? Or was he to pay off someone? Was he looking to do it himself? Was he looking to pay that money back to his dad? Did his dad find out and didn't like the fact that the money was gone? And all of a sudden, because it wasn't right away, it was several days later, within the week though, that Dan Crowley Jr. created that GoFundMe page. Keep in mind, Dan Crowley Jr. didn't know Comel's mother that well at all. Why would he create $6 million fund for someone he hardly knew who lives down in Texas? Speculation. Was Dan Sr. quiet about the murders because he knew the possibility of it coming to light that he funded the killings and his remaining son committed bank fraud to do so? You know, that would be one of the only very small reasons I would ever suspect a parent to go along with a false narrative about a family member of yours. And that situation would be only if something worse was to come out, if it was exposed. Now we know Dan Crowley does not seem to be authentic in any of his interviews on the documentary, any of his communication and how he's acted, and his behavior does not seem to be authentic. That's speculation, though. But if he was covering up this, if it got out that the money was used out of his bank account to fund the murders, the hitmen, and his son did it illegally, his son would now be in jail, and he would be himself responsible for aiding and abetting or conspiring. You know, even if it's indirectly. So that would be reason enough for him to toe the line of the official narrative and get this case swept under the rug and moved along. That's the end of part 3. I'll do a follow-up presentation with the additional parts here, as there's a lot to go over yet, but I just wanted to get the first 3 done. Now today is December 19th, 2018, and I wanted to do this 4 years ago today. 4 years ago today was Ranny's last day of school. David and Comel, her parents, both went to the Montessori school, picked her up at the end of the day, and drove her home. And it was a Friday, and Christmas break was coming up. Ranny never went to school again. 4 years ago today. This is Crowley Case Updates. My name is Dan Hennen. Thanks for listening. Hello, my name is Dan Hennen. Today is December 29th, 2018, and I'll be covering Crowley Case Updates, Facts versus Speculation, Part 2. Now, last week on December 19th, 10 days ago, I did a Part 1, Facts versus Speculation. And on the Crowley Case investigation, the reason I'm putting this together is there's a lot of new members on the page, Justice for David Crowley and family. And there's a lot of new people coming on. And there's a lot of confusion as far as theories, speculation, and what the actual facts are in the case. And so last time I broke down some of the information to help clarify, and I'll be doing the same thing today. Now today, Part 2, here's the topics. We did parts 1, 2, and 3 last time. Now today we're going to start with part 4, the deaths. Why all 3 is the topic. Part 5 is Eric Sayward. Part 6, the documentary by Eric Nelson. So we'll cover these points today, and please feel free to leave your comments and questions below in the comment section of this video. Part 4, the deaths. Why all 3? Fact: David, Comel, Randy Crowley were all found dead. Question: why? Question: if the Gray State team had issues with David, why not kill him? If it was a government hit done by a wet work team or an assassination, why not just David? Typically, that's the case. Just the person causing problems is the one killed. So you have to ask yourself, why all three? Fact. David's script had a value of $30 million to it. Speculation. Were all the remaining heirs killed on purpose? If David would have been killed, the script is in his name, the rights would have fallen to his wife, Kamel. If David and Kamel both would have been killed, the rights would have fallen to the descendant, to the child, Rani. So the speculation is that all three were killed on purpose and needed to be killed, so the rights would fall into the family, meaning Dan Sr., Dan Jr., possibly the sister Allison, but at least it would be out of the hands of David and Kamel. Fact. David Crowley's personal Facebook had content deleted/hidden from his wall after his death. After the bodies were found, content, which means posts, comments, likes, and posts were removed. We don't know if they're deleted. They could have been hidden, but the fact of the matter is they're no longer there. Speculation. Someone from the Gray State team accessed his page. Remember now, this is his personal page. Nothing to do with Gray State, the movie, the documentary, any of his work on the project itself. This is his personal Facebook page. Someone accessed the page and removed certain posts/comments. Let's move to part 5. Part 5. Eric Sayward. Eric Sayward was a friend of Sean Bright's, was living in Wisconsin, was a self-described best friend of David Crowley, was helping with the project more on I'm guessing a minimal role, not a main player, but was involved. Fact. Eric Sayward was evicted, homeless, and had at least one warrant out for his arrest in the state of Wisconsin. Fact. Eric Sayward has a noteworthy criminal background. Fact. Eric Sayward has a violent temper. Fact. Eric Sayward was discharged from the U.S. military because of mental illness. Speculation. Eric Sayward is a possible paid informant for the federal government. He hasn't held a job, carries only cash, and doesn't have a bank account. Fact. Eric Sayward worked as a rap music producer in a studio in La Crosse, Wisconsin. Speculation. Eric Sayward was using his rap music business as a front company. Speculation. Eric Sayward has a history of violent crimes, but never served any serious prison sentence. Why? Fact. Eric Sayward was living at a buddy's house in Bryce Prairie, Wisconsin at the time of the killings. Fact. Bryce Prairie, Wisconsin is a 2-hour, 15-minute drive to the Crowley home in Apple Valley, Minnesota. Fact. Eric Sayward has all his personal belongings in a single duffel bag. Fact. His roommate stated that Eric wasn't around too much. Fact. Eric Sayward moved out on February 2nd, 2015. The very same day he made his first threat to myself via instant messenger. Remember the famous February 2nd messenger that popped up on my Facebook that says, if you mention David Crowley one more time, I will pay you a visit. And so the speculation here is that when he was crashing at his buddy's place in Bryce Valley, he may not have had internet access. as everything was quiet at that time. When he moved into this new roommate, crashed at a new person's house, is when he became very active on social media again. So perhaps the new roommate had internet access and whatnot. Fact: Eric Sayward later moved to Phoenix, Arizona in 2015. Fact: Eric Sayward's name was never mentioned in the police reports concerning the Crowley case. Fact: Eric Sayward was never even interviewed by investigators in a Crowley case. Speculation: Eric Sayward didn't have a permanent residence at the time of the murders and may have been living in the Crowley home for the 2-week period and then left after the murders. Remember, there's this 3-week window that one could argue that the family was in there being tortured and or beaten and or killed for a 2-week period, and then whoever was in the house left a week. The bodies were there by themselves for a week. The dog was alone for a week. The body's decomposition state progress was roughly 7 to 10 days. It wasn't 3 weeks. There's a 3-week window. If the bodies are only there for a week, what happened in those 2 weeks? Speculation is Eric Sayward didn't have a home. He could have been in there. Fact: Eric Sayward didn't have a girlfriend at the time of the murders and didn't have custody of his children at the time. Therefore, he wasn't accounted for by anyone. So he was, and that's a fact. Now we can put the speculation as far as where we think he was, we think he was doing. But the fact of the matter is he wasn't accountable to anybody. And so, did he have an alibi for the time of the killings? Fact: Eric Sayward was working with Madison, Wisconsin-based truther Kevin Barrett as early as 2010, I believe. So he was active working with him. Another truther. He was active in We Are Change, and Kevin Barrett's well known in the truth community as far as 9/11 and various staged events. Fact: Eric Sayward was the administrator of Kevin Barrett's website at one point. Speculation: Eric Sayward infiltrated Kevin Barrett's business to monitor him. We don't know how those two got put together, but was it part of his job? Fact: Eric Sayward took over the website hosting for a website called MemoryHoleBlog.com, a site run by truther and Florida professor James Tracy. Fact: once Professor James Tracy's website was under the control of Eric Sayward, it never went live. That's a fact. Never went live. Fact: Professor Tracy paid Eric Sayward for website services. Fact: Eric Sayward didn't contact Professor Tracy after he had control of his website. Fact: Eric Sayward didn't return phone calls from Professor Tracy after he had control of his website. Fact: Professor Tracy didn't have his data backed up. Fact: James Tracy brought a suit against Eric Sayward for damages and to get his data back and his money back. Remember, James Tracy was a leading researcher into the events at Sandy Hook, and this resulted in his former website being pulled down because it had so many views and so many people looking at it. The case was, this was done, he was sued in a Florida district court. Eric Sayward was. Fact: Kevin Barrett recommended Eric Sayward as a web admin for Professor James Tracy. Speculation: Eric Sayward was hired to shut down Professor Tracy's website by his handler. Speculation: the feds knew that Professor Tracy didn't make regular backups of his data and could easily subdue him and his work if they got a hold of his website. speculation. Eric Sayward was unwittingly part of a larger operation to take down James Tracy. So how Sayward ties into this whole thing is very interesting. We know he's very active in truther type movements, but we also know by his actions that he's not a truther whatsoever. So what is he doing in these truth movements? What is his role? What role is he playing and why? Who's paying him? Part 6, the documentary by Eric Nelson. This is the documentary that came out called A Gray State. Not to be confused with the Gray State movie that was never made, never produced by David Crowley. Not to be confused with the documentary called Gray State The Rise, which David Crowley did and was released later by Sean Wright. This is a documentary that came out and is on release right now on Netflix and A&E Network, called A Gray State. This is where things really get interesting. Part 4. On October 30th, 2014, the documentary shows Comel having a rapture. So if you remember seeing the movie, there's a rapture scene where she's hallucinating, dreaming. Something happens to her back then. Fact, the rough cut of the documentary A Gray State did not include this scene in the rough cut. The final cut, the one that airs if you go to Netflix, you'll see this rapture scene is in the final cut. This scene was used without permission from the Alam family. So a little background here. When the documentary film crew came, they wanted to get the Alam's input. This is Comel's parents, Anjum and Naila Alam, along with Comel's sister Sidra. They said, yes, we will take part in your documentary under one condition. You send it to us first before it gets released so we can view it or review it and make sure we want to be in it. And so they did do that. Fact, Sidra and Anjum Alam pulled out, never signed anything after they viewed the rough cut. So they backed out. Mr. Alam and Sidra said, this is not going in the direction it should go. This documentary is really painting David and now Comel in a very bad light. Basically propaganda. And I agree with Mr. Alam. They cherry-picked video footage from all this information and used the bad footage to shed David and Comel both in a bad light, as if they both were going crazy, both were nuts, just to discredit them both. Didn't have a lot of facts in that movie at all. And so you see later on the final cut, there was a lot of interviews with Comel's girlfriend in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis. Those weren't in the original cut, but they added that back in later after Anjum specified which scenes to cut out of the movie that he didn't want in. So they cut out some scenes, added the new footage of the girlfriend, but then also added the rapture without his permission. So this may have been a jab from Eric Nelson, the documentarian, the director. Why would you add that back in if you know that you don't want to, the family member, the father, already wants to cut out scenes that include making your daughter look bad, being shed in a poor light? He adds that in. The first ending, the rough cut, the movie ended showing clips of the sister Sidra's pregnancy. She was pregnant and married at the time and about to give birth to her child. That was cut out, and instead they added in the scene at the end of the documentary with the dog Paleo running around in a backyard of a home, and so they swapped that out. Now the other thing, fact, is Anjum Alam says, let me know when it airs. Let me know when it's finally done, when it premieres, and when it goes on to TV, because I want to see this final version. The fact of the matter is the Alam family was never told, and Eric Nelson just released it. Fact, the Alam family did interviews at a hotel in Texas. That's where they're from. They live outside of Waco, Texas. On the scene was Mason Hendricks, Chris Peck, and Eric Nelson. They helped do the interviews down on the location in Texas at a hotel. They wanted to pick a neutral site instead of doing it in the home. Nelson and Mason Hendricks wanted them to do separate interviews with Anjum and Sidra, doing interviews separately. Anjum, the father, Kamel's father, only wanted to take part in the documentary if the interviews were done together, him and his daughter Sidra together. So there were some issues with the documentary, even with the filming back then, as far as how they wanted to frame it, how they wanted to push it, and how they wanted to steer this documentary. Fact, Mason Hendricks was credited as the associate producer of A Gray State with Eric Nelson. This was David Crowley's friend and a member of the Gray State team, now being credited as the associate producer of this film. Fact, Mason Hendricks' name does not even appear in the police reports. So there's nothing to support that Mason Hendricks was even interviewed, questioned by authorities, or anything. Mason Hendricks was the one who did a multitude of multiple interviews with the media, along with Danny August Mason, in the aftermath of the bodies being found. He certainly would have been someone to question and get his take on it. But once again, his name, if you do a search on the police reports on this case, Mason Hendricks' name does not show up one time. Fact, the film crew for the documentary was in my personal house for roughly 4 hours in June of 2016. Fact, David's weed dealer, his marijuana dealer, Chris Peck, was a member of the film crew that day, unknown to me. Fact, Mason Hendricks wanted to be on site for the filming along with the film crew in June of 26 in my home. Eric Nelson thought it wasn't a good idea because I know I was familiar with Mason Hendricks at this point, and he says it wouldn't have been a good idea to be on site. I did not know Chris Peck at the time, and so they agreed to have him on site, as I think he was the audio technician that day. So Mason Hendricks was not in my home, as he was not allowed to from Eric Nelson. Fact, my wife's portable DVD Blu-ray player went missing that day. Fact, I discovered that someone took a shit in the bathroom toilet's upper tank that day in my house. Not in the toilet bowl, but in the water tank itself above the bowl. Speculation. Did Chris Peck leave the surprise in the bathroom and take the DVD player? I have no reason to suspect it was anyone else. That wraps up part 6, the documentary by Eric Nelson. Very strange indeed. Now, since the part 1 was done, I've got some items that I wanted to add into this as far as the crime scene. I had mentioned, and also I've got to start off with a correction. There was I listed under speculation, I had said that there was David Crowley's skull, the piece of skull was hit with a blunt force instrument. That's a fact. David's skull, there was blunt force trauma. It was hit by an instrument in the back of David's skull. That is a fact. What is speculation? We have to only speculate what tools were used in this attack. The tools that David Crowley was hit with in the back of his skull were consistent with a 6-sided socket / ratchet, or a specialty lug nut wrench, or a specialty Allen wrench. Speculation. A silencer was used on the weapon for the killings. Speculation. The killer or killers weren't too concerned about being noticed in that home and felt comfortable there, doing the blood writing on the wall, staging the scene, setting up the laptop to play the music in a loop, leaving behind notes, perhaps even sleeping there. So it's not a fact to say a silencer was used, but it's heavy speculation. The weapon used was a .40 caliber hollow point handgun, which would have been very loud. Would have sounded like in a neighborhood of that size, sounded like a cannon going off. So the neighbors would have heard, neighbors would have been alerted. It would have piqued interest and raised suspicion in the neighborhood if something else was going on there. By the actions or the behaviors of the killers, we can speculate that a silencer or some sort of suppressor was used because the killers weren't too worried about being noticed or being surprised. Speculation. The family was bound or gagged during the torture and the beatings. Keep in mind, neighbors didn't hear screams, yelling, dog barking, nothing neighbors heard, not let alone the gunshots. They never heard anything coming from that house. So that's a speculation that they were bound and or gagged during this 2-week time period. Speculation. The dog Paleo was kept downstairs in the basement for possibly both of those 2 weeks. Most of the dog feces in the house were in the basement. The toilet lid in the bathroom was left up and the water was gone. One could speculate that the dog drank out of the water, all the water out of that basement toilet, as the bowl was empty. The photographs show the bowl was empty, the toilet bowl. Fact. Marijuana or weed was left out on the bedroom dresser. That's crime scene photographs show that weed was left out. Fact. The results from both David and Comel's autopsy shows that there was no marijuana in their system. It is well known that marijuana stays in a human body for up to 30 days, and it's detectable within a 30-day period that marijuana is in your system if you smoked it. Now, fact, David bought marijuana on December 19th from Chris Peck and allegedly smoked it that day. If he did, 30 days would be January 19th of 2015, that it would still be in the system. Not to mention if David or Comel would have smoked marijuana after the 19th, meaning smoking marijuana multiple times during that 30-day window. If you assume that they didn't smoke it at all after the first time, after the 19th, there still should be something in the system on January 19th. Keep in mind the bodies were found on January 17th. Autopsy was performed. No weed found in either of the bodies at all. Not even a slight trace. Now the speculation is because weed was out, David and Comel apparently didn't smoke it. Speculation is that someone else in that house was smoking weed during that time frame and left it out. Also leaving it out to help stage the scene and paint David and Comel as drug users to discredit them. But if someone was smoking it in that house, it was someone other than David or Comel. Fact. David's gun safe near his bed was opened. Fact. David's gun safe could only be opened by his fingerprints. It was a gun safe that was activated from the fingerprints of the owner. Speculation. David was forced to open the gun safe. Speculation. David's severed hand was used to open the gun safe. Now both of those are speculation. They might be wild theories, but it's still speculation. We don't have anywhere to state that that is fact. We know that the safe was open. David's left hand was still on his body. If it was something was severed, it had to have been his right hand. Note, fact, the note on the desk on the office said, "Submit to Allah now." Now the fact is the blood print or the fingerprint on that piece of paper was in fact David's. So the speculation is that David did in fact write that. The speculation is, was David forced to write this? While he was still living during this 2-week period, did David actually write it? Fact. There were no water bowls for the dog found in the home. Fact. There were no food bowls for the dog found in the home. So all these 400 photos taken from the crime scene, there's not a single water bowl for the dog Paleo in that home. There's no food bowl. Now there's dog food found in the home. But the interesting thing is to look at when you see the crime scene photos is always to look for things that are strange, not a place, and also look for what's missing. 400 crime scene photos, every inch of that house was photographed. There is not a single water bowl or a dog bowl in that home. Who took them? They obviously would have had them at some point. Why were they removed? Speculation. The basement door was opened once the killers left the scene, as there was small amount of dog feces in the upper main level floor of the home. Most of it was downstairs. So if the dog was down there, locked up, door shut for a 2-week period, was there 2/3 of the feces in the house found in the basement? Yes. Looks to me like it was. And then was the dog let back up after the killers left? Speculation, but the amount of feces supports that. And then I'll wrap up with a few other notes here. Fact. Sidra, the sister of Kamel, and her then fiance Vinny made a trip to Minnesota from Texas in October of 2014. That's a fact. We have receipts. We have credit card transactions showing that they were in fact there. They did swap out the car and they did return back to Texas. Speculation. Sidra's account of David acting strange was true or not? Sidra goes on to mention David was acting strange, didn't let her in the house, didn't let her see her sister, didn't let her see her niece, and David was acting strange, paranoid, and he looked unkept. Now, the way she describes this is much like how Danny August Mason describes him and Sean Wright, that David looked disheveled. He was cutting himself off from people altogether. Wasn't himself, was delusional, was hallucinating, was on drugs, was drinking, all of these things. So right now we have to consider the fact that the testimony that Sidra gave during the time of her visit in October 2014 to the Crowley home is now speculation versus fact. She said that what was left behind in that car was a photograph of the family with a note on the back where Kamel wrote, "I love you and Mom." Doesn't say anything about the dad. But when you ask Sidra for this photograph, she doesn't recall having it. She doesn't recall where it went. And she doesn't have it. So it gets into this fine line of what's fact versus speculation. We do know that Sidra called 911 when she was there. She stopped into the Apple Valley Police Department in October of 2014. That's a fact. She called 911 because she thought that the car was not acting right and it didn't seem right. That's a fact. There's a record of her calling 911. But her description of David being a whack job, is that now true or not? That's what I'm calling speculation. Fact. There were lots of black hair found in the scene in the living room. Speculation. Was it pulled out of someone's head? If it was, there would be the root of that hair attached with the skin and the root and the DNA and whatnot attached. If there's evidence that it was yanked out or pulled out during a torture or a beating. Speculation, though, the hair was cut off. The large amounts of black hair was cut off. There was a knife found at the scene. There was also a scissors in the kitchen. Did someone go and cut all that hair off? Those two are speculations. All we know is there's a fact of lots of black hair found at the scene, and we don't know if it was cut off or pulled off. It would be interesting to know what it was, but it seems to be Comel's or Ranny's hair that was found in that living room. It wasn't David's. So that is all for today. Please leave your comments below and with your questions and comments. My name is Dan Hennen. Today is December 29th, 2018, and this is Facts versus Speculation Part 2. Thanks for listening. Hello, my name is Dan Hennen. Today is January 6th, 2019, and I'll be providing updates on the Crowley case. Mainly, this episode is being in response of the Catherine Michelle's video where she heard back and had a conversation with lead Sergeant Gummert, Apple Valley Police Department, lead investigator, Sergeant Gummert. And in that response, there was a couple things I wanted to clear up and clarify. But before I did that, I ran this video, forwarded this video to a friend of mine, a former retired Minneapolis police detective from the Minneapolis Police Department. Former detective, retired. I said, watch this and let me know your thoughts, and let me know as a sounding board some of your thoughts on number one, his response, number two, her questions, and number three, what to do next. So I wanted to get his take on this. And here's what he had to say. Number one, he recommended finding out which particular detective was in charge of doing the investigation on that piece of skull. He said that would have been something assigned to one of the detectives to look into it, to find out how whose body it relates to, whose skull it came from, if there was indentations or beatings on that, how many there were, what instrument did it, and if there wasn't, there would still be someone assigned to that particular piece of evidence. He said, I would find out which detective was in charge of that piece of that skull. The video shows that there was 10 to 12 indentations of a blunt force instrument used on that piece of skull, which we found out in the reports belonged to David. And if David Crowley had a blunt force trauma to his skull, did he do it himself or did someone else do it to him? Obviously, he didn't do it to himself and then go on to proceed to kill his family. So who did it and with what instrument? So he said, go to that information, find out who it was that did it and what their conclusions were, because they would have some sort of report on that particular piece of information. I responded back and said that we have all the information, allegedly. We have all the information, and there's nothing that shows that any detective looked at that piece of skull fragment. He said, well, that would be odd. Someone would still be assigned to each piece of evidence, everything there. Someone would be in charge of, or having ownership of, a responsibility or accountability for that piece of evidence. So he said, check that first. The other thing he said was, when you sent that new package, when Catherine Michelle sent that package to the detective, the police chief, and other people, he says any new findings like this. Catherine mentioned the skull, and mentioning the fact that there was a bullet found in the attic that didn't have any blood on it, the handgun that didn't have the fingerprints, no prints at all, in fact. and all these strange things that were going on, and she went on to list all the various things. He said, if there's anything new to the case, he said, anything new relating to the case, whether the case is open or closed, if it's an active investigation or if it's even a closed investigation, the sergeant or the person in charge of the investigation will still assign a detective to go follow up on that piece, on that new piece of info. So, in a perfect world, Catherine Michelle's information that she sent to the police chief, they would look at that and say, oh, wow, this is a new piece of David's skull that has indentations of a beating that took place. Someone would still be assigned to look into that to see if it's true or not, or to vet it. And so he says, find out who that was. Once again, I said, I don't think anyone was assigned to it. I think they looked it over and said it doesn't have any value to the case, and the case is closed, so we're moving forward. He says, well, that also doesn't make sense. He said, we get leads all the time back in the day, and we'd have to follow up on those leads. Number one, it's part of the log that says we received a package in the mail or an email with this information. Someone exposed the fact that there's anomalies in this skull. We're going to assign John Doe to investigator John Doe to look into it, and then here's his response. Not enough to go on. Yes, we'll investigate it further, or hey, we'll go call that person back and see what they have, and then we'll go check into it. But there's always going to be some follow-up done on any new pieces of information. He said that's just the order. That's just how things work. You'll always follow up on something that's important, whether it was true or not, or whether there's anything, if they deem it that there's not enough to go on or nothing to go on, they're still going to do a follow-up, contact and reach out to that person and say, you know what, we don't think there's enough there. But there'll certainly be a follow-up. It never gets ignored or disregarded, even if the case is closed. They will follow up on any piece of information. So I thought that was very interesting. And then he also went on to say that even if the police chief or the lead detective, or Sergeant Gummert in this case, if the police chief believes that the case is closed and says so, and says, you know what, the case is closed, and if they are not interested in doing anything more further with the case, he said, then take your findings then to the county sheriff, in this case, the Dakota County Sheriff. He said, take your, he or she, whoever that person is the top law enforcement person in that county. So he says, if you find yourself banging your head against a wall dealing with the Apple Valley Police, that's just a city law enforcement. You can always go to the next higher up. They can then, in turn, say, yes, this does look odd. There are some anomalies. There are some irregularities. And yes, we want you to open it up. Whether you like it or not, we want you to open up that case or reopen the case. Now, the police chief there may say, no, not interested, then it'll lead to something else. But at least they do have the right then to explore it further if we're getting pushback, if we're getting resistance, if we're getting a roadblock, a wall put up while trying to get this case reopened. And the last thing then that he said is, even if you get no luck there, you can still go to the Minnesota State Attorney General. So I think Catherine was right in what she did. She took it to the police chief. She sent the information to the Dakota County Sheriff's Department, and she sent it to the Minnesota Attorney General. So I think everything she did there was correct, and the order and the procedure that she did was correct. And then I spent some time talking with this person a little more about the case, and he says that we have to get, once again, squared away on our verbiage, our nomenclature, and what words we use here as, putting together YouTube channels and putting information out there on a case like this for a Facebook page or a Facebook group. He said, make sure you get your verbiage clear and concise, because it may not be what we in the business use. He said, you use the phrase informant, confidential informant. And he said, just be sure that you know that a confidential informant or a CI will be assigned a confidential informant number. They will be on the payroll, essentially. The money that that person receives will come out of a budget, and that person is usually vetted to a very high degree to ensure that that person is trustworthy, and then they'll be on the payroll, or essentially for a law enforcement agency then to be on the payroll, to be paid to give out information. That's a highly trusted person, a highly trusted person. He said when you talk about these scumbags being informants and being paid cash under the table and off the books, he said that doesn't take place. And so what I said in response is, I said, this is at the federal level. We know that when we mention words, players like Sean Wright, Eric Sayward, people like those on previous videos that are informants of some sort or paid infiltrators of some sort, just to make sure the audience, the listening audience here, realizes I'm not talking about confidential informants or CIs that are on the payroll and highly trusted people that have been vetted and are getting paid on someone's agency's books, official checks. I do mean being paid cash. I do mean being paid under the table, off the books, and this is at the federal level. So he didn't seem to think this type of arrangement took place. But I said, I'm talking at the federal level. I know there's not going to be any, these guys are not working for the local or the state organizations, but they're working at the federal level, and not the good federal level either. So this would not be certainly on the up and up. And so when I mean there is, I'm talking at the federal level, and this is by, just to clarify, I don't want to say the bad guys or the rogue elements of the federal agency, but I'm not talking the good guys here. And so if these guys are indeed some sort of informants or paid, this is not the good kind of the respectable people. These are the people, the low life scum that are in these roles. And there's certainly this type of arrangement does exist. So this is what I was trying to explain to him and explain to the listeners of this case, that these guys, they're not on the up and up. They're not being paid certainly on the books, and they are being paid, if this is the case, which is speculation, it would be cash. That's why these people, that's why they have these people, that's why these people are controllable, because of that. They don't have bank accounts. They don't have necessarily checking accounts. They are being paid cash, and they are there to do something that's not on the up and up, such as our case here. So I just wanted to clarify that. He also said that if this case, the Crowley case, if it was being actively covered up, he said the case would remain open. The investigation would remain open. He said any case that's open, the general public can't get at the data, they can't get at the reports, and they can't get at the information. That's why they keep it open. I said, well, this case was closed a couple of years ago. He said, well, then I have a hard time believing it's being covered up, because that's the general rule of thumb. They will keep a case like this open, and therefore no one can get at it. He said that if this is closed, go out there and get the information. I responded with, yes, we've gotten the information, we've gotten the reports, the police reports, the supplemental reports, the BCA reports, the Dakota County Electronic Crimes Unit reports, the lab, the autopsy. We have everything because the case is closed. He says, I think it's very hard that a cover-up in any situation like that would be in any case that is closed, because they're allowing you to see the data. If there's a cover-up, they wouldn't want you doing that. So we agreed to disagree on that. Now, he did go on and put a disclaimer on there and qualified that statement by saying, if there is a cover-up, let's say, for instance, hypothetical, this case is covered up, and it's covered up at the federal level, you may run into a case like that where it is ordered, the cover-up is ordered at the federal level. And if that's the case, a couple of guys will walk into the police chief, flash their badges, and say, we want this case hushed up. You're going to close it up as quickly as you can, and we don't want it to drag on. Brush it under the table and close it. He said, if that's the case, top level, and persons below that would not even probably be even aware of it. In other words, there wouldn't be a meeting with a dozen detectives on the police force, sit down everyone and shut the door and say, by the way, we're going to cover up this case now, so everyone please keep your mouth shut. He said the only person that would even know would be the police chief. And in this case, I think there's two captains in that department, but he said a person such as Gummert, the sergeant of the detective unit, he just manages a group of 5 or 6 people. He's just the manager of that detective unit. He would certainly not be involved or even know about it. So he said, if anyone, it's Chief Reichgel and Mr. Bermel and Captain Francis and Bermel. But it's the police chief. He said if there was some type of arrangement like that done at the federal level. Now, we have no evidence that anything done here is at the federal level. But if we remember back the information, whether it's disinfo or misinfo from Mason Hendricks, Sean Wright, were saying, look, the feds are involved in this. The FBI is involved. The Department of Homeland Security is involved. We don't know if that was true information or not, because we can't trust those individuals. But that's just food for. That's what his take was. He said certainly the individual detectives wouldn't be aware of anything. They're just doing their jobs. The actual sergeant of the detective unit himself, in this case, James Gummert, would never be the wiser. He says that this retired detective believes that Gummert more than likely does honestly believe that they are done with the case, and they've done all that they could with the case. And he isn't aware of any cover-up. He's probably telling the truth when he tells Catherine Michelle that there's no cover-up here. There's nothing. We're not hiding anything. It is what it is. The case is closed. He said he believes that Gummert is being honest in that answer. Keep in mind that he's also a pawn and would be doing whatever his commanding officer tells him, and he wouldn't question it. Now this relates. My friend, the detective, retired detective, said that this relates to a chain of command, much like the military. You have a chain of command in the police department, and you do what your commanding officer tells you to do. You don't think about it. You don't think, is this right? Is this decision wrong? Should I do the right thing? Should I do the wrong thing? You do it. You do what you're told. And the people beneath you do what you tell them to do. He said it's a chain of command. Your commanding officer, whoever that is, you do what you're told. For instance, James Gummert would not go to the police chief and say, you know what, something smells fishy with this case. I think that something's up. It doesn't smell right. The evidence just doesn't add up. He would deliver the reports, and if the police chief says the case is closed, he moves on to his next case. Now, he also says that because of the chain of command, much instilled very much like the military, you never go off course and you don't do what your commanding officer tells you. Don't go off, you don't change course. That's just something you don't do. The other thing is that you're simply told, you do what you're told and you do your job. He said your job would be in jeopardy if you ever went off course or ever disobeyed, essentially direct orders. So I thought that was interesting. Now, this former detective also says that he believes that if the department did make a mistake in the investigation or missed something related to the case, that he said you would expect them to dig their heels in and not admit it ever. He said even if there is a mistake, they're not going to come out and say, look, we're going to do a press conference, we made a mistake, let's reopen this Crowley case investigation because we have several mistakes that were made. Some things weren't followed up on. He laughed at me. He said, you would never, he says, no, Dan, you would never admit your mistakes. He says, there's such a thing called respect, and the other thing to keep in mind, he said, with police and law enforcement in general, much like the military, you're very proud. You also have a sense of control. Control is big with these people. He says, you're giving up control if you're coming out to admit that you're wrong. He said, you'll never see that. In other words, he said, this would be like any other job. It would be very, very embarrassing to say that you screwed up. Now, I mentioned to him that we're not looking to point fingers and blame folks. What I try to keep getting across on our page and with the members on our page is that we want the truth and we want justice. I would love it if the Apple Valley Police Department came out and said, look, we made a mistake. Not to say, ha ha, told you so, but to say, let's get the truth out there. We want justice for this family, of the victims of this, what I call a triple homicide. I still believe it's a triple homicide. We're looking to get justice. But after 4 years of trying to get this information out there and no one listening, it is frustrating. But he said they're going to dig their heels in and they're not going to admit to anything. And then what I went on to say then is, if they do dig their heels in and they're not going to change their mind and come open to come face the facts of this is actual evidence, I said they must expect that they're going to receive some flack from the general public, and I believe they are. They're getting a lot of flack. They received a lot of flack for their poor effort on this case. Now, what I went on to say next to this individual, as I said, I tried to reiterate the fact that it's already been proven that David didn't do this. Okay? Proven. No way he could have done this. We've crossed that bridge months ago that we know he didn't do this. Now the question is, how do you get something reopened and how do you expose what really went on and try to get justice for this case? We're not trying to find out who did it, but we do know from the investigation that the investigators, we're hoping that the investigators would simply change the manner of death to undetermined for David Crowley. It's officially ruled a suicide. We know that can't be true. It physically couldn't have happened that way. And with the evidence that's been presented over and over and over again, it isn't a suicide. So could they please just change the death to undetermined? Now that's not going to happen either. And I said to him too that I said the group doesn't exist to change people's minds. We are not trying to force new ideas and change what their thinking is. Try to shove something down their throat. We're trying to be open and transparent and provide information so let people make their own decisions and come to their own conclusions. Right now we're in the mode of trying to show the public what was discovered and try to get justice for the family. Remember now, the Apple Valley Police Department did state that the public is not in danger. There's not criminals on the loose, there's not killers on the loose, and the public is not in danger. These are their words, not my words. These are their words. Now, if David didn't do the killings and didn't kill himself, that can't be true. The public is in danger, and the killers are on the loose. And so that's the point. We're trying to give the thrust, the main message of this entire process is the public is in danger, the killers are on the loose. And so if their job is to serve and protect the citizens of Apple Valley, Minnesota, are they doing that? This former detective also went on to state that there's other agencies involved in a case like this with 3 dead bodies. He said, for instance, you've got the Minnesota BCA, you've got the Dakota County Sheriff's Department, you've got the Dakota County Electronic Crimes Unit, and the Hennepin County Medical Examiner Office, the coroner. These are all very different agencies that are not out to cover the other agencies. They are independent agencies that aren't trying to kiss ass for anyone else. He said it would be extremely hard for a cover-up to happen that would include the commingling of all these agencies coming together to assist in a cover-up. He said that would be almost impossible to do. Now, I mentioned last of all, I went on to go over a topic of being a police officer, being a law enforcement person, taking the oath and going, getting sworn in to do your job by taking this oath. And I said, if the cover-up was taking place, if there was a cover-up, how would something like this get exposed? Your oath tells you that no, I'm not part of being I'm not involved. I'm not interested in being part of a cover-up. I'm going to step out of this because that's what my oath says. He went on to say that your oath does not come into play. It isn't even considered. Most don't even remember what the oath actually says, but it is considered part of a ceremony when you get sworn in and you get your badge. That is it. So this blew my mind, right? He says, no, the oath. I said, but you guys are held to a different standard. If you're a detective, a law enforcement officer, a patrolman, sheriff's department, any sort of law enforcement, you take a sworn oath to get that badge. That is up there. That's a whole nother level. He says, no. Your job is just like anyone else's job. You're there to get a salary. You're there to get a check. You're there to put food on the table. And when the day is done, you go home. He had mentioned it's similar to a politician getting sworn in to take office. It means nothing. He said, look at politicians. They're corrupt and they're dirty. They don't care about the oath. Similar to, I took that as something that was similar to as a student in school growing up, elementary school. Every day you stand up, you do a pledge of allegiance to the flag. I don't know what the words mean, what they are. I also didn't care at the time. He said it's the same thing as that. You don't care. It's just a motion you go through. And I said, part of the cases that we cover, whether it's the Gary Webb murder, whether it's the Phil Marshall murder, the Michael Hastings murder, the Pat Tillman murder, the Senator Paul Wellstone murder, or back in the 60s when you've got RFK, JFK, MLK, these are obviously assassinations that have already been proven that they weren't what they are. And so these aren't just conspiracy buffs out there pushing hot air for those to, maybe they'll listen and, maybe they'll change their minds. These are people, these groups are groups of people trying to expose and trying to tell the general public what really happened based on facts and evidence. And so much like the case is here, we are not here. Believe me, we've got better things to do with our time than follow a case like this that none of us even know the participants or the victims. The point here is that it is a fact and that it is evidence that this didn't happen the way it is, and how do you open a case like this? And so this person says, I don't believe Gummert believes that. He's thinking he's trying to, in his mind, he goes, it's probably just Gummert placating this group because he doesn't believe it. And so that's what I got into with him. I just asked, I said, what do you do? What do you do to try to wake people up to let them know that we are serious as a group? This isn't a joke. We're not playing around. We're not wasting everyone's time. And so he didn't have an answer. He just says, it is what it is. They're not probably going to listen to you. They also don't care. And so he just said, tried moving it up the food chain. Dakota County Sheriff's Department, Minnesota State Attorney General. Hopefully this cleared up some issues we had with the recent statements by Sergeant Gummert. Please leave your comments below or your questions, and hopefully this added some value. Thanks for listening.
are missing with no explained reason. For all intents and purposes, they've just vanished.
Hi, I'm Kyle Kraska. It's the FBI case that has all the elements of a Hollywood thriller. A missing millionaires, a huge reward, and clues the cops just can't figure out.
We feel almost certain that the women were the victims of a violent crime. The car was very badly and totally burned.
It's been positively identified by dental records. Second victim that was in the trunk of the burned vehicle. DNA testing has been done.
People responsible for the Yosemite murders are behind bars.
The police interest in the ex-cons heated up. They were getting locked up on parole violations.
But at that point, they were focused really in the wrong direction.
Our final guest of the program is a former police officer, Steve Sanzeri.
Everyone on all the message boards have all been talking about this case and debating it and saying, hey man, there's something more here than meets the eye.
But I wanted to visit with an expert on this, and Steve obviously is. Steve, thanks for joining us. How are you?
Good morning, Scott. Thanks for having me on.
Mr. Sanzeri, are you there?
I am. How you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. Like you don't know, we've just been talking all day.
The massive manhunt, all kinds of resources, multiple SWAT teams and sheriff's offices and highway patrol and helicopters and infrared technology to find him because of a screw-up.
I mean, I just hoping I wouldn't get shot at the front door. And the curtains moved, the sun's breaking, all of a sudden, Candler came out like a wildcat right at me for my weapon.
This is a fascinating story.
Hangman is coming down from the gallows, and I don't have very long. Yeah! His dig is up, the news is out, they finally found me. The renegade who had it made, retreat from the bounty.
Are you interested in the paranormal? Murder mysteries, cryptocurrency, and thought-provoking interviews? Then check out Crypt Rick's I've Been Thinking on YouTube, or every Monday night at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Studio A at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. Welcome to the Crypt.
Murder at 1051 Ramsdale Drive. What happened to David Crowley, his wife, and his daughter? If this was truly a double murder-suicide, why did investigators fail to prove David Crowley guilty? Where is the evidence David Crowley killed his wife and daughter? Where is the evidence David Crowley killed himself? Within 24 hours of finding the bodies of David Kamel and Rania Crowley, the Apple Valley Police Department were treating the incident as a double murder-suicide. Authorities cannot prove David wrote Allahu Akbar in his wife's blood on the living room wall. Authorities cannot prove David wrote I have loved you all with all of my heart on a laptop in the kitchen. Authorities cannot prove David wrote Open the Rise most recent version Submit to Allah Now on a notepad in his office bedroom. Authorities cannot prove the dog trapped inside the house ate David's right hand, both of Kamel's hands, and their daughter's right arm, since dog feces tests were never done. Authorities did not know about a bullet that rolled out of a living room carpet until they were notified by the cleaning company 2 days after the bodies were found. That bullet would later be tied to Rania Crowley. Authorities did not see the bullet hole in the living room ceiling or the bullet in the attic above until they questioned David's friend a month after the bodies were found. Authorities did not find a motive to support their accusations against David Crowley. Authorities did not find David's blood on any of the bullets at the crime scene. Authorities do not know when David Kamel and Rania Crowley died. What we know for sure is that David Crowley has not been proven guilty.